Welcome to All in All. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into the fascinating world of Ian Fleming, the man behind a character who has left, well, just an absolutely indelible mark on global culture. A character you definitely know simply as James Bond.
He really has become this global icon, hasn't he? And understanding Fleming's own journey, where he came from, how he actually worked it, it really illuminates why Bond resonates so deeply, and frankly, what keeps him relevant after all these decades.
That's exactly it. To sort of pull back the curtain on this whole phenomenon, we've gathered quite a stack of material excerpts from articles, some academic research, loads of notes on his life and his work. It covers Fleming's biography, his pretty unconventional writing process, and the just colossal cultural impact that WWII has had around the world.
Yeah, our mission in this deep dive is to really get to the heart of the matter. We want to unpack the origins of this iconic figure, explore its significance. Why does it matter? We'll trace its evolution across different eras in media, and ultimately see if we can find some practical insights, things we can maybe glean from Fleming's world, maybe even apply them ourselves.
Okay, let's unpack this then and get started by going right back to the beginning. Because the making of a spy writer, well, it isn't quite the straightforward tale you might expect, is it? Ian Fleming's early life was marked by, honestly, significant complexity and a good deal of tension.
Oh, absolutely. A major influence, I'd start there, was his mother, Eve. Now, after his father, who was a member of parliament, died heroically in World War I, Eve had these incredibly high expectations for her sons, particularly Ian.
Right. High expectations, putting it mildly, maybe.
Definitely. And she saw his early setbacks, in academics and his initial career attempts, not just as personal failures, which would be bad enough, but as a genuine disgrace to the family name, a real blow to the legacy she was desperately trying to uphold. This created just immense pressure on him.
And you can really see him trying to navigate that pressure, can't you? He attempted to follow the expected path. He aimed for the Foreign Office, the diplomatic service. Failing those examinations must have been a huge, huge personal and familial disappointment.
Oh, massive. Especially given his mother's intense desire to mold him into this specific kind of success, to honor his father's memory.
It really set him on a different trajectory, though, didn't it? His path diverged quite significantly from what was traditional or, frankly, expected for someone from his background, his social class. Despite all that pressure, he just didn't quite fit that conventional mold.
Which, ironically, probably prepared him better for the completely unconventional life he would eventually lead. Sometimes not fitting in is the best preparation.
But those years weren't wasted, not at all. He gained some incredibly valuable, if sometimes difficult, experiences. He had international exposure studying in places like Geneva, Kitzbühel. That gave him language skills, a much broader perspective than many of his peers.
And he even studied under this fascinating character named Forbes Dennis, who was a sort of eccentric educator, kind of a proto-spy himself, with all these diplomatic connections. This period, it fostered connections within both diplomatic and, importantly, literary circles that would prove surprisingly useful later on.
Sources also mention some rather complex romantic entanglements during this time, too. Adds another layer to his personal development, doesn't it?
It does. These experiences, the travel, the social connections, the, let's say, emotional complexities, they were all data points, things that would eventually filter, consciously or not, into the emotional and geographic landscapes of his novels.
Oh.
Even for a character as seemingly detached as James Bond sometimes appears.
His career shifts are quite telling, too, aren't they? After the Foreign Office disappointment, he tried journalism, worked for Reuters for a bit.
Which he was apparently quite good at, actually. Fast-paced information gathering.
True, but again, his mother's pressure for financial stability, for something more respectable, pushed him towards a different path. He moved into banking, of all things, at a firm called Cullen Company, and he famously, hilariously maybe, described this time as being the world's worst stockbroker.
Yeah, you get the sense he absolutely hated it, and there's this specific financial pressure point mentioned in the sources too. Apparently his grandfather, Robert Fleming, who was a very successful Scottish banker, didn't leave Ian an inheritance. That added to this drive for financial security, finding a stable profession that could finally satisfy his mother's expectations.
It really highlights that struggle, doesn't it? That tension between personal inclination, what he might have actually enjoyed or been good at, and this relentless external pressure for something perceived as more solid or suitable.
Exactly. And looking at that whole journey, the failures, the detours, the constant search for something there's a really clear practical lesson there for us, for you listening. It's about the importance of persevering, somehow through those internal conflicts and those external pressures.
Yeah, allowing yourself to explore different interests, even if they deviate wildly from the expected route, can perhaps unexpectedly lead you towards your true calling. I mean, Ian Fleming, the world's worst stockbroker, becoming one of the world's most famous writers. That's a pretty powerful example of that, isn't it?
It really is. It absolutely underscores that sometimes the failures or the less conventional paths are the ones that actually equip you with the diverse experiences needed for something truly unique later on.
And speaking of unconventional paths, the pivotal shift, the one that most directly leads us finally to James Bond, was his move into World War II intelligence work. This wasn't just a career change. It feels like it was a complete personal transformation for him.
Oh, completely. Joining the Royal Navy, specifically serving as assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence, Admiral Godfrey, who many think was a model for M. This was where all those seemingly disparate prior experiences just clicked into place.
Right. His education, his languages, his travel knowledge, the networking he'd done, even those analytical skills he might have grudgingly picked up while floundering in the stock market.
Exactly. They all suddenly became incredibly valuable in the covert world of espionage. He didn't just fit in. By all accounts, he thrived there. He found his niche.
And he wasn't content with just doing the standard desk work either, was he? He was known for his innovative approach to intelligence gathering and maybe more so to deception, proposing bold, sometimes downright audacious plans for misinformation and sabotage. He had a truly strategic and, let's be honest, imaginative mindset when it came to wartime operations.
Absolutely. Operation Ruthless is often cited as a prime example of this. It was this highly ambitious, slightly crazy scheme. The idea was to try and capture German naval codebooks, particularly the Enigma keys.
How are they planning to do that?
Well, the plan involved getting a captured German bomber, crashing it into the English Channel, having British commandos disguised as the German crew send out a distress signal, and then, when a German rescue vessel came alongside, they'd overpower the crew and seize the codes. Wild stuff.
Wow. Okay. Did it happen?
No, it was never executed exactly as he conceived it. Finding the right captured bomber proved difficult, and the risks were enormous. But the sheer ingenuity and ambition of the plan itself, it speaks volumes about his thinking, his willingness to think outside the box. Very Bond-like in a way.
Definitely. Sources also touch on his involvement in other significant, if sometimes more shrouded, operations towards the end of the war. There's mention of his hand in Operation Paperclip, which in the British context involved identifying and sometimes smuggling certain German scientists and technical experts back to the UK before the Soviets or Americans could get them.
Right, securing that intellectual capital. And then there's the intriguing, though details remain pretty scarce, Operation JB. This was reportedly an ultra-secret plan from early 1945 focused on tracking down Nazi money and gold, assets potentially hidden away in neutral countries like Switzerland or Sweden, trying to recover looted wealth.
So these experiences weren't just, background noise for his later life. They were the absolute core material, weren't they? His immersion in real espionage, tactical planning, the high-stakes cloak and dagger dynamics of wartime intelligence. It all laid the concrete foundation for his future writing.
He was blending that real-life exposure to the world of spies, the procedures, the atmosphere, with his innate talent for imaginative storytelling. He saw the dramatic potential in it all.
And this is a really important contrast to make, isn't it? It's crucial to distinguish between that thrilling, often glamorous, fictional world he would create and the gritty, often tedious reality of intelligence work.
Oh, absolutely essential. Real spycraft. Especially the human intelligence side, the human depth. It isn't typically about glamorous casinos, dodging assassins in exotic locales, or, avoiding sharks on a nightly basis.
No, it's much more about the slow, painstaking process of building relationships, cultivating sources, identifying vulnerabilities, earning trust over long periods. Often in mundane settings, not fancy hotels. It's hard graft that requires immense patience, discretion, and psychological understanding.
Sources mention, for instance, the incredibly high divorce rate among intelligence officers, partly because of the pressures of a job you simply cannot discuss with your partner, the intense secrecy, the inability to share your day-to-day reality.
That makes sense. The job often means ending relationships, or at least maintaining distance and secrecy, which strains them, not forming whirlwind romances, as Bond so often does.
Exactly. The reality is far more complex, far more demanding, and often far less glamorous than the fictional portrayal. There's even that anecdote you hear about some real intelligence officers thinking they're the real James Bond, which perfectly illustrates the sometimes blurry line, but also the significant disconnect between the myth Fleming created and the actual job.
Fleming drew heavily on the reality, the atmosphere, the procedures, but he heavily stylized and dramatized it for maximum effect. He was writing thrillers, after all.
And it was this potent blend, intense real-world experience combined with a vivid imagination that eventually compelled him to sit down and write. The decision and the actual process of writing Casino Royale, that first Bond novel, is a great story in itself, deeply tied to his personal life at that specific moment.
He famously needed to create a sort of vacuum in his life to get the creative work done. For him, this meant escaping his London life, his job at the Sunday Times Kemsley newspapers as foreign manager, and arranging to spend months each year in Jamaica at his house, Goldeneye.
Right. He'd bought the property, which was an old donkey racetrack, and built the house there in 1946. It became this annual ritual, his escape hatch.
And by the time he actually started writing Casino Royale in early 1952, it was his 6th year of these Jamaican visits. He'd apparently explored the island pretty thoroughly by then, done the snorkeling, cataloged the birds.
And perhaps more significantly, he was about to get married to Anne Charteris, who was pregnant with their son Caspar. He described the prospect of marriage, this major life change, as filling him with terror and mental fidget. He wasn't exactly thrilled about settling down.
So writing became a form of self-therapy, an antidote to the impending nuptials.
Pretty much. He decided he would damn well sit down and write a book, The Spy Story, to end all spy stories. As he put it, partly to give his idle hands something to do during his Jamaican holiday, and as he called it, an antibody to his qualms and anxieties about getting married. It was a way to channel that restless energy into something productive.
It's notable, isn't it, that while he did some journalistic writing and other projects back in London, all 14 of his Bond books were written during these annual 2-month visits to Jamaica. Goldeneye was his creative engine room.
He even suggested that others looking to write might find a similar productive vacuum in, say, anonymous hotel bedrooms, anywhere away from the distractions and demands of their regular lives, creating that dedicated space and time.
His motivation for writing was also very clear, wasn't it? And something he was quite open about.
Oh yeah, refreshingly so. He said he wrote unashamedly for pleasure and money. He wasn't necessarily trying to write highbrow literary fiction destined for academic study. But he did aim high within his chosen genre. He wanted to write thrillers designed to be read as literature.
He aligned himself with authors he really admired, didn't he? People like Edgar Allan Poe, Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler.
Eric Ambler, Graham Greene, too. Masters of suspense, atmosphere, and character within the thriller format. He saw himself in that tradition.
And he had a very specific formula he stuck to, which is fascinating in itself.
Yes, almost algorithmic in a way. First, he wrote about what genuinely pleased and stimulated him. Cars, gadgets, exotic locations, food, drink, gambling, beautiful women. His own interests fueled the narrative.
Second, he used fantastic plot scenarios that were, as he put it, beyond the probable, but not beyond the possible. They definitely stretched credulity, but he tried to keep at least a toehold in some kind of warped realism.
And to keep the reader hooked, to stop them from feeling hoaxed by these sometimes quite wild plots, he employed 2 key technical devices. The first was sheer speed of narrative. Pace, pace, pace.
Right. He felt a fast pace hustles the reader quickly beyond each danger point of mockery, just propelling them forward so they didn't stop and think, wait a minute, could that actually happen?
Exactly. Keep them turning the page. And the second, equally crucial device was the constant, almost obsessive use of familiar household names and objects as point of repair, points of reference.
Ah, the brand names.
The brand names, the specific details. These concrete, recognizable things were meant to reassure the reader, to keep their feet firmly planted on the ground, even while the plot soared into the fantastic. It creates this weird, effective contrast.
Give us some examples. We know the cars.
Oh yeah, he mentions a specific Ronson lighter, or gives those excruciatingly precise details about Bond's car, the solid exactitude of a 4.5-liter Bentley with an Amherst Villiers supercharger in the early books. Later, the Aston Martins, of course.
Or specific real-world locations like the Ritz Hotel in London or the 21 Club in New York. He'd use the exact Latin names for the flora and fauna Bond encountered in Jamaica.
Highly specific details about Bond's clothing, his Sea Island cotton shirts with short sleeves, the specific knot in his tie, even the exact recipe for his Vesper Martini in Casino Royale. These weren't just random details. They were calculated anchors in reality, designed to make the fantasy feel tangible.
And his writing speed and method were famously rigorous, weren't they? Quite daunting, actually.
Absolutely. He aimed for 2,000 words a day, working for about 3 hours in the morning and maybe an hour in the evening. crucially, he never corrected as he went. He never went back to revise, except maybe to the foot of the last page, just to pick up his train of thought for the next session.
He warned against introspection during drafting, didn't he?
He did. He felt that stopping to analyze or criticize yourself constantly would completely interrupt that crucial, fast narrative flow. He argued you'd be lucky to write 500 words a day if you did that, and you'd probably end up disgusted with that smaller output anyway.
So by sticking to his method, he'd get his 2,000 words down, good or bad, and wasn't truly disgusted with the writing, as he put it, until the entire book was finished, which typically took him about 6 weeks for each novel. Bang it out, then fix it later, or have someone else fix it.
That kind of discipline, combined with his unique experiences and that imaginative flair, it culminated in Casino Royale. And the genesis of that very first novel is wonderfully illustrative of his whole process, tied directly to a personal anecdote from the war.
Yes, the Estoril casino story. In Portugal, right? Towards the end of the war.
Exactly. He was there on an intelligence mission, went to the casino, apparently got involved in the game of chemin de fer against some Portuguese businessmen, and lost a rather mundane amount of money. Nothing dramatic.
But in his head?
But in his head, in that moment, he whimsically imagined these seemingly ordinary local businessmen were actually high-stakes German secret agents engaged in some tense spy game trying to bankrupt each other for operational funds.
That simple imaginative leap, transforming a personal, slightly frustrating but otherwise pretty unexciting event into this thrilling fantasy scenario, became the direct inspiration for the pivotal baccarat scene between Bond and Le Chiffre in Casino Royale.
It perfectly captures his talent, doesn't it? Taking fragments of his own life, even the less glamorous bits, and spinning them into these compelling, larger-than-life narratives.
Okay, so that gives us a really good sense of Fleming the man, the forces that shaped him, and how the character of Bond was actually born from that mix of reality and imagination. But the true scale of the phenomenon, I mean, it's just staggering when you look at its significance and cultural footprint.
Oh, undeniable. James Bond has become, as we mentioned earlier, arguably the most famous literary character, full stop.
Yeah.
He's transcended the page in a way very few others have managed. It's just there in the global consciousness.
His status is truly incredible, and what makes him so effective as a spy character and maybe so enduring as an icon is this really interesting duality he has.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, in the novels particularly, he's professional, he's certainly capable, he even shows capacity for change and can be surprising in a convincing way, as one critic put it, within the bounds of his personality. He learns, he gets hurt, he has doubts sometimes.
Right, there's a human dimension there.
But he also possesses what Fleming called the great advantage of flat characters, meaning he's instantly recognizable, almost an archetype, because of those consistent, memorable details we talked about.
Ah, the reference points again. You recognize him immediately through his habits, that specific breakfast he always orders. Eggs, strong coffee, whole wheat toast, marmalade. The way he likes his cigarettes, Moreland Specials with the 3 gold bands. His preference for certain cars, the gambling habit.
That characteristic tug he gives his tie, his fastidiousness about food and drink, often attributed in the books to his bachelor lifestyle, having to manage small details himself, and developing fussiness out of trouble over detail.
It's that unique cocktail, isn't it?
Yep.
A blend of these humanizing specifics that make him feel just real enough to be engaging, combined with those consistent, almost iconic brand-like traits. That keeps Bond evergreen. He feels relatable on some level, but also aspirational and instantly identifiable. Adaptable, too.
And the impact, it just radiates outwards far beyond the character in the books himself. Think about the sound, the music of the spy genre.
John Barry. You have to talk about John Barry.
Almost single-handedly, he created the spy genre of music through his work on the Bond films, particularly his incredible arrangement of Monty Norman's James Bond theme for Dr. No.
It's a remarkable piece of cultural engineering, really. As a later Bond composer, David Arnold described it, Barry brilliantly combined elements of cool, jazzy bebop swing with that now legendary, vicious, distorted electric guitar riff played by Vic Flick.
That sound, it was completely new. It was cocky, swaggering, confident, but also dark and dangerous all at the same time. It just hit a nerve, didn't it?
Instantly iconic. That theme became inseparable from the spy archetype itself. Barry then went on to become Bond's sort of house composer, starting properly with the second film, From Russia with Love, and he defined the entire sonic identity of the franchise for over a decade. And arguably, he set the template for the whole genre's soundscape for years to come.
That iconic music is just one thread, though, of Bond's broader influence on other media. He profoundly shaped the spy genre across television and film. You just see his fingerprints everywhere.
Oh, definitely. Look at TV shows like The Man from UNCLE in the 60s. That show was originally pitched with heavy input from Fleming himself. It was initially even titled Ian Fleming's Solo.
No kidding.
Yeah. Featuring agents like Napoleon Solo and Ilya Kuryakin battling an evil organization called THRUSH, which was clearly inspired by Fleming's Spectre or SMERSH. The whole setup screams Bond influence.
And speaking of UNCLE, George Lazenby, the actor who played Bond just once on Her Majesty's Secret Service, he even made a deliberate cameo as a character named JB driving an Aston Martin in a later UNCLE reunion movie. A very clear nod to the connection.
Beyond that, the influence is just pervasive. Mission Impossible, obviously, that's team dynamic, but still that high-tech espionage feel.
Yeah.
Get Smart, the brilliant Mel Brooks spoof, which only works because the genre tropes Bond popularized were so well known.
Even shows like MacGyver, in a way, feel like a kind of resourceful, less violent DIY take on the solitary, clever agent concept established by Bond.
In literature, too, you saw immediate responses to Bond's success. Some were clearly satirical, like The Liquidator by John Gardner, who ironically later wrote official Bond novels. That book was explicitly written as a piss take, a parody of 007's world and conventions.
Others tried to kind of out-Bond, didn't they?
Yeah, books like James Mayo's The Man Who Sold Death, featuring the character Charles Hood. That took a tougher, maybe more cynical, more violent, Bond on steroids kind of approach, trying to capture the same audience but dialing up the grit.
And then there's the groundbreaking A Modesty Blaze, the Spy Queen, created by Peter O'Donnell. She's such a fascinating counterpoint.
Absolutely. O'Donnell, arguably more successfully than anyone else at the time, really shattered the glass ceiling for female spies in popular fiction. Sources frequently compare Blaze's work to Fleming's, noting shared elements, like the espionage subject matter, the exotic locations, a focus on the branded life deluxe, though maybe less overtly than Bond, and those ingenious, often quite eccentric, villains.
But Blaze offered this fascinating reversal of the gender dynamic, didn't she?
Precisely. You remember that famous, perhaps slightly crude line from a Sunday Times critic about Fleming's Bond? That he was what every man would like to be and what every woman would like to have between her sheets.
Right.
Well, O'Donnell's Modesty Blaze, according to the critique of her time, was the heroine that every woman would like to be and that every man would like to have between the sheets. It's a really clever flip of that dynamic of aspiration and desire, putting the female character firmly in the driver's seat. Richer than Bond, often more capable.
A truly fascinating publishing history with Modesty Blaze as well. Started as a comic strip, then brilliant novels. Shame about the terrible film adaptation they made early on, though.
Yeah, they didn't do the character justice at all.
Yeah.
But Bond's influence even extended into unexpected areas like the blaxploitation genre in the United States in the 70s. Well, the Bond films were apparently surprisingly popular with African-American audiences at the time. This popularity directly led to the conception of characters like John Shaft, played by Richard Roundtree. Shaft was explicitly designed by his creator, Ernest Tidyman, as a black 007, tough, cool, stylish, operating outside the system.
And films like Cleopatra Jones with Tara Dobson fit that mold too, right? A strong, capable, fashionable female agent.
Exactly. The Bond franchise itself later seemed to acknowledge this popularity and influence by incorporating black actors into more significant roles, moving beyond just simple cameos or background parts.
You mean like Yaphet Kotto as the villain Kananga and Gloria Hendry as Rosie Carver in Live and Let Die, Hendry being the first black actress to have a proper romantic relationship with Bond on screen.
Precisely. And then later, you have more prominent roles for actresses like Halle Berry as Jinx, Grace Jones as Mayday, and Naomi Harris playing Moneypenny in the Craig era. A slow but noticeable evolution.
And globally, the impact was just immense, wasn't it? You saw this huge wave of Asian and European ripoffs and homages trying to cash in on the Bond formula.
Oh, absolutely. Some were relatively straightforward spy thrillers, just changing the nationality of the hero. Others were, well, less straightforward. You get films like 009 Mission Hong Kong from Italy, or the utterly outrageous Filipino production For Your Height Only.
Ah, yes, starring the 83-centimeter tall martial artist Wang Wang as Agent 00. Truly unbelievable stuff. But it just shows how widely the character and the basic formula resonated, or at least were seen as commercially viable, across the globe.
Beyond the world of media, Bond becomes a cultural touchstone in everyday life. People adopt his catchphrases without even thinking about it anymore. Bond, James Bond, shaken, not stirred. They're just part of the lexicon.
And he influences fashion in really tangible ways. Designers actively compete for product placement because associating their brand with James Bond provides such cachet, such an image of sophistication and cool.
Totally. His looks have genuinely sparked trends over the years. Think about the futuristic, almost space-age, shoulder-padded suits worn by Roger Moore in Moonraker. They had a clear influence on early 1980s power dressing.
People have gone to tailors specifically asking them to recreate Sean Connery's iconic, simple gray suit from Dr. No. That minimalist 60s, cool.
And, yes, we have to mention it, Daniel Craig's brief appearance in those rather tight swimming trunks, the Speedos, in Casino Royale, reportedly caused a noticeable spike in sales for that style of swimwear. The power of Bond.
He's also had a significant impact on tourism, hasn't he? Especially in the early days.
Definitely. Back in the 50s and 60s, when the books and early films came out, international travel wasn't nearly as commonplace as it is today for most people. So featuring these exotic locations, the Caribbean, Japan, Switzerland, Thailand, had a massive wow factor for audiences.
It really did transport people, and it often transformed previously less-known destinations into major tourist hotspots, literally overnight after a Bond film featured them. Jamaica certainly benefited hugely.
Location managers in the early days talked about specifically wanting to take people to places they'd never seen before, which, as you can imagine, became increasingly challenging as global travel became more accessible to more people.
So the value proposition shifted slightly.
Yeah. Today, while spectacular locations are still key, production companies often receive substantial tax incentives and other benefits for filming in specific locales, precisely because of the immense global exposure and guaranteed tourism boost a Bond film brings. Sources mention Mexico City reportedly offered around $20 million in incentives for Spectre's incredible Day of the Dead opening sequence. It's a business calculation now, too.
And you can't really talk about cultural touchstones without mentioning Bond's appearance parachuting into the London 2012 Olympics opening ceremony with the Queen herself.
That was an extraordinary moment, wasn't it? It really cemented his place, not just as a fictional character, but as a kind of enduring symbol of British identity, maybe even British cool, on a massive global stage.
Turning to the commercial side, the franchise is just an absolute juggernaut. MGM, the studio that has long been associated with the films, apparently refers to Bond internally as the crown jewels and their most significant asset.
And the financials absolutely back that up. It's incredibly consistently successful, generating over $2.6 billion globally just since 1996 alone. That's from the Brosnan era onwards. And typically, each new release, generally outperforming its predecessor, even when you account for inflation, is remarkably durable.
The history of product placement within the films is legendary, too, almost a character unto itself, isn't it?
Oh, completely. It reads like a roll call of luxury brands over the decades. Rolex watches in the early days, famously replaced by Omega from the Brosnan era onwards. Brioni suits giving way to Tom Ford, Bollinger Champagne, various vodka brands, iconic car makers like Aston Martin, BMW, Lotus, tech companies like Sony, even older placements for certain sodas, and of course, cigarettes in the early films.
And marketers are still incredibly eager to associate their products with Bond, aren't they? They understand the power of that brand association.
Absolutely. It conveys luxury, sophistication, action, technology. It's a very potent mix for advertisers.
And it's probably worth noting, though it's maybe less glamorous, that the franchise's long history is also kind of riddled with complex legal disputes and rights issues. That's part of the story, too.
Yeah, the long-standing legal battles surrounding Kevin McClory's original contributions to the Thunderball story, for example. That led directly to the rival Bond film, Never Say Never Again, in 1983, starring Connery again, competing directly with Roger Moore's official Bond film, Octopussy.
Screenwriters have also talked about the challenges posed by these rights complexities over the years. As one writer, Lorenzo Semple Jr., who worked on Never Say Never Again, quipped, "The lawyers made an awful lot of money from the Bond franchise."
It's a significant, if often overlooked, aspect of the franchise's history. Now, finally, when we look at the legacy, especially of the original books by Fleming, we really have to address certain controversial aspects, don't we?
Yes. Some of the content, viewed through a modern lens, is described pretty unequivocally as homophobic, misogynistic, sometimes racist. It reflects the attitudes and prejudices prevalent among certain circles of British society at the time they were written in the 50s and early 60s.
And this has led to a significant ongoing debate, particularly recently, around how to handle new editions of the books. Should dated or offensive language be edited out, maybe censored, to make them more palatable today? Or should the originals be preserved exactly as they were written, as products of their time with their flaws intact.
It's a tricky question. What's the prevailing view?
Well, one strong perspective, shared by Fleming's estate actually, is that acknowledging the outdated thinking, perhaps through introductions or footnotes, is crucial for understanding the historical context and how attitudes have progressed. Removing it entirely isn't necessarily the answer, as it risks sanitizing the past. Everything is a product of its time, and we learn by recognizing and understanding that context, not by erasing it.
Can you give an example from the books?
A frequently cited one is a passage in Casino Royale, where Bond internally reflects that women are simply not suited for espionage and would be better off staying at home minding their pots and pans, essentially. It's jarring to read today.
Definitely.
But you can certainly point out that this is an outdated and offensive viewpoint today, reflecting Bond's and perhaps Fleming's own biases, without necessarily advocating for its removal from the text itself. It tells us something important, if uncomfortable, about the character, his creator, and the era in which he was conceived.
And perhaps a bit cynically, some sources we looked at note that controversies like these, while sparking important discussions about representation and changing values, can also inadvertently serve as largely an exercise in advertising. A situation where, for a legacy character like Bond, maybe no publicity is bad publicity in terms of keeping the name and the books in the public eye.
It's a complex issue. Thinking about Fleming's own aspirations for his literary work, he certainly desired to leave behind a notable body of work, something more substantial than just ephemeral thrillers. However, his health issues later in life, serious problems affecting his breathing and heart, exacerbated by heavy smoking and drinking, seem to have affected these ambitions.
He also reportedly felt a growing sense of moral and physical decadence as he neared 50, didn't he? A sort of disillusionment, perhaps.
Yes, sources suggest he found it increasingly difficult to maintain his focus on writing later on. He also faced significant challenges in his personal life, including a famously turbulent marriage to Anne.
And he even expressed losing his zest, his enthusiasm for writing about Bond, didn't he? At one point seriously considering killing the character off from Russia with love, though he ultimately brought him back.
Exactly. It seems he felt trapped by the relentless demand for more Bond, the pressure of his own success. It really highlights the personal toll that creative work and intense fame can take, even on someone who projected such an image of outward confidence and control. Fleming himself was clearly a very complex character, capable of toughness, even described as cruel at times, yet also deeply sentimental, and someone who was apparently very skilled at suppressing his deeper feelings, a very British trait, perhaps.
Given that complex legacy, that constant cultural relevance, it's really no surprise that Bond has had to evolve so significantly over time, particularly as the film series has become the primary interface for most people with the character, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Fleming himself, towards the end of his life, apparently believed the films would eventually outlive the books, and he was certainly right about that. The movies are the main event now for most audiences.
And a huge part of that longevity and evolution is down to the stewardship of Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, who took over Eon Productions, the company that makes the official films after Barbara's father, the legendary producer Cubby Broccoli, passed away.
They've done a remarkable job, really. They've been credited with successfully reinventing the franchise not once, but arguably twice since 1996. First with Pierce Brosnan in Goldeneye, bringing Bond into the post-Cold War era, and then again, more radically, with Daniel Craig in Casino Royale.
They seem adept at adapting Bond for contemporary audiences, while, as Barbara Broccoli herself put it, keeping him close to its roots. And crucially, not being afraid to take risks with the character and the storytelling to keep him fresh.
The most obvious way this evolution manifests, of course, is through the different actors who have taken on the role. Each brings something different.
Sean Connery was the first, and arguably still the most impactful in terms of transforming the character from the page. The book Bond, as described by Fleming, was maybe a bit more nondescript, perhaps looking a bit like the musician Hoagy Carmichael, kind of lean, dark, maybe more of a working man hero type in some ways.
Right. Connery, with his sheer charisma, his physicality, his style, really turned Bond into that modern, sophisticated, suit-wearing, aspirational superhero figure. That image defined the cinematic Bond for decades.
George Lazenby had that singular experience, of course. One film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He famously insisted it would be his only Bond film even before it came out, reportedly finding it incredibly challenging to navigate the sudden, intense fame and the public expectation of always being Bond, rather than just being seen as an actor playing a role.
A tough position to be in. Then you had Roger Moore bringing a lighter, more humorous touch. Timothy Dalton attempting a darker, more Fleming-esque interpretation.
And Pierce Brosnan, when reflecting on his tenure, particularly the immense pressure of rebooting the franchise with Goldeneye after a 6-year hiatus, he captured the weight of that role perfectly when he said he was just glad I didn't screw it up for the kids. You feel the responsibility they carry.
Definitely. And then, of course, Daniel Craig. His casting in 2005 for the 2006 release of Casino Royale represented a really significant shift in direction. A deliberate reboot.
Big time. His portrayal, which lasted an impressive 15 years and 5 films until No Time to Die in 2021, was deliberately designed to be more rugged and raw, darker, and more emotive than most previous iterations.
He was seen as a cool fit for the younger generation, someone who brought a sense of modern grit and realism back to the role. He was frequently described by critics and fans as the realest, cruelest, most tortured Bond ever. Closer, in some ways, to Fleming's original conception, but updated.
Craig's era really made a conscious effort to bring the character, and often his nemesis too, back to a more human scale. The threats still had global implications, but they often felt more personal, more grounded, and Bond himself felt much more vulnerable physically and emotionally.
And interestingly, some academic analyses suggest this era also attempted, consciously or not, to undermine the conventional masculine ideal that had been so strongly upheld in many earlier Bond films.
So?
Well, Craig's Bond was often shown dealing very visibly with physical pain, emotional trauma, loss, and vulnerability. The narratives explored themes through the hypervisibility of his physical body getting beaten up, scarred, showing strain. There was also his relative detachment from overly complex gadgets compared to some earlier Bonds, relying more on wits and brute force.
And maybe a certain nostalgia.
Exactly, a kind of nostalgia, perhaps, for a lost form of British imperial power or more traditional kind of dominant masculinity, but presented in a way that also questioned it. It often contrasted sharply with earlier portrayals that tended to reinforce a kind of unquestioning hegemonic masculinity, characterized by pure power, effortless physical strength, complete emotional control, and near invulnerability. Craig's Bond was powerful, but flawed and breakable.
The female characters, often reductively stereotyped as Bond girls, and the villains have also evolved significantly alongside Bond himself, haven't they?
Yes, thankfully. Female characters, particularly in the later films, have moved beyond simply being the classic villainous archetype or just a straightforward damsel in distress or love interest. There's more agency, more complexity.
Think of Halle Berry's character, Jinx in Die Another Day. She was explicitly described in the promotional material at the time as the feminine James Bond, seen as the next step in the evolution of women in the Bond movies.
Right. Portraying a character who was intended to be more modern and more intelligent than many predecessors, an equal partner in the action. Notably, while there were love scenes, her character didn't disrobe in the same gratuitous way previous Bond women often did, perhaps reflecting a shift towards the PG-13 rating, but also maybe a greater awareness of respect. Berry herself reportedly said something like she had been there, done that, regarding nudity, and didn't feel it was necessary for the role.
And Sophie Marceau in The World Is Not Enough played Electra King, a really complex character who was arguably a Distaff 007 in her own right. A victim-turned-villain who used her intelligence, vulnerability, and sexuality as weapons to manipulate men, including Bond himself. It mirrored how Bond had often used his charm and physical appeal with women in the past. A fascinating reversal.
And the villains in the Craig era, as we touched on, are often back to that more human scale. While you still get some larger-than-life figures like Silva in Skyfall, played brilliantly by Javier Bardem, their motivations often feel more personal, more psychologically grounded, reflecting Bond's own more realistic portrayal.
You saw glimpses of this even in earlier films, where villains started to become maybe more complex reflections of Bond himself. Gustav Graves in Die Another Day, played by Toby Stephens, he was framed as this kind of demented, wealthy entrepreneur type, maybe a caricature of figures like Richard Branson at the time.
What's really interesting there is that the character explicitly modeled himself on Bond's public image. He even calls out Bond's own perceived flaws, his unjustifiable swagger, the crass quips, a defense mechanism concealing such inadequacy. The villain literally became a twisted, insecure reflection of Bond himself. Very meta.
The spectacle of the films has had to adapt as well, hasn't it? Those exotic locations were such a major draw in the early days when international travel felt more exclusive.
Right. The definition of what constitutes truly exotic has naturally evolved as global travel became more accessible for larger numbers of people over the decades. It's harder to genuinely wow audiences with just a pretty beach now.
Early on, location managers talked about the goal being explicitly to take audiences to places they'd never seen. As the world effectively shrank through easier travel and media exposure, that became much harder to achieve consistently.
So now, the spectacle relies more heavily on incredibly elaborate action sequences, cutting-edge special effects, pushing the boundaries of practical stunt work, and leveraging those amazing location shoots for immense global marketing exposure, often facilitated by those tax incentives we mentioned earlier. The nature of the wow factor has definitely shifted over time. Still spectacular, but achieved differently.
Okay, so looking back at Fleming's whole journey, the creation of Bond, this massive, enduring cultural phenomenon and its constant evolution, what can we actually take away from this deep dive? What are the really practical lessons or insights we can extract from Fleming's world? Maybe things you listening can apply to your own lives or creative endeavors.
Well, for anyone interested in writing, especially popular fiction, Fleming's core writing advice remains incredibly potent and, honestly, universally applicable. His primary rule wasn't about crafting intricate literary themes or complex character arcs. It was simply get the reader to turn over the page.
Keep them hooked. That focus on momentum, on reader engagement above all else is just fundamental to any kind of successful popular storytelling, isn't it?
Absolutely. And his specific techniques for achieving that are really concrete and transferable. The importance he placed on speed and narrative, particularly in thrillers, using pace to maintain that forward momentum, to build suspense, and yes, to carry the reader past potential logical hurdles or moments of disbelief.
And that brilliant technique of using specific, real-world details those points of repair to ground even the most fantastical adventures in a sense of reality.
Exactly. Using those brand names, the precise descriptions of objects, accurate place names, it's such a powerful tool for any storyteller trying to make the unbelievable feel believable. It builds a crucial bridge between the reader's everyday world and the fictional one you're creating. Makes it feel tangible.
His disciplined approach to output is also a harsh but maybe valuable lesson for anyone trying to create anything. Setting that daily word count, 2,000 words, say, in his case, and crucially, resisting the urge to constantly edit and second-guess yourself during the initial drafting phase.
Just get the story down first, fix it later. That focus on momentum over perfection in the first pass is a major hurdle for so many creative people. Fleming's method forced him past that block.
Looking at Fleming's life journey itself, beyond just the writing, offers broader insights too, doesn't it? His early struggles, the constant pressure from his mother, navigating those varied, sometimes unsuccessful career changes before finally finding his true path in writing.
It's a powerful reminder about the value of perseverance, maybe resilience, and about allowing yourself, or maybe needing, to explore different avenues, even if they aren't the ones initially expected for you or by you. Your journey might be circuitous, maybe even feel like a series of failures at the time, but the experiences gained along the way can be unexpectedly invaluable later on.
His diverse background really demonstrates that, doesn't it? From studying under eccentric educators in languages to journalism, that frustrating banking stint, and especially his pivotal time in naval intelligence, it clearly shows how varied experiences can combine to inform a unique perspective and fuel creative work in ways you could never predict.
You just never know how seemingly unrelated skills or pieces of knowledge will connect and become useful later in life. Everything feeds in somehow.
And that idea he embodied of transforming personal experiences, even mundane ones like losing money at a casino, or negative ones like his anxieties about marriage, into creative material, that's a fundamental principle for any artist, isn't it?
Absolutely. Fleming wasn't afraid to draw heavily from his own life, his own tastes, his own experiences, exaggerating and fictionalizing them, of course, but starting from a point of personal reality or observation. It gives the work a certain authenticity, even amidst the fantasy.
It's also worth reinforcing that reality check about espionage we discussed earlier. It's a good counterbalance. While Bond provides thrilling, escapist fantasy, the actual reality of gathering human intelligence is far less about stylish assassinations that neatly end relationships.
And much more about the incredibly demanding, often isolating, sometimes morally compromising work of building trust, manipulating vulnerabilities, and managing complex human connections over long periods, often with significant personal cost.
That anecdote about CIA training classes potentially being the world's biggest dating service, but also leading to incredibly high divorce rates due to the job's secrecy and pressure, it's such a stark contrast to Bond's seemingly consequence-free romantic life. It really highlights the practical difficulties and personal toll of real spy work.
It reminds us that the fictional glamour, while entertaining, hides a much tougher, often less exciting, and ethically murkier reality.
Fleming also didn't shy away completely from exploring moral complexities within his thrillers, which adds a layer of depth, especially in the earlier books. Characters like Le Chiffre and Casino Royale aren't just mustache-twirling villains. Their criminal activities are often driven by complex financial pressures and political allegiances that blur the lines between pure evil and more morally ambiguous actions.
Right. It makes Bond's seemingly straightforward mission, stop the bad guy, much more complicated when you understand the villain's motivations might be rooted in desperation or political expediency. It forces the reader, and sometimes Bond himself, to consider shades of gray, not just black and white.
And finally, reflecting on Fleming's own personal struggles later in life, his deteriorating health, that feeling of moral and physical decadence as he approached 50, his reported difficulties maintaining creative focus and navigating his turbulent marriage.
It serves as a poignant reminder, doesn't it, that even immense creative success and global fame don't automatically erase personal challenges or bring uncomplicated happiness. Success brings its own pressures.
His open expression at times of losing his zest for writing about Bond, even contemplating killing off the character simply because of the relentless pressure and maybe the feeling of being trapped by his own creation, it underscores the personal toll that can come with being defined by a single massive success. It's a common struggle for artists.
He was clearly a fascinating blend of contradictions.
Yeah.
The tough exterior, the alleged cruelty, yet also the sentimental streak, and the deeply private man who became famous for creating a very public icon. Very skilled at suppressing feelings, as you said.
So wrapping this all up, what we've really seen in this deep dive is how Ian Fleming's unique, sometimes quite difficult personal and professional path directly shaped the creation of James Bond.
We've explored how Bond grew from the pages of those relatively slim thrillers into this massive, multi-generational cultural force, influencing everything from music and fashion to international tourism and countless other forms of media worldwide.
We've traced how the character and the franchise have had to continuously evolve, adapt, and reinvent themselves to remain relevant and resonant across rapidly changing social and cultural landscapes over 70 years.
And importantly, in looking closely at Fleming's specific creative process, his life experiences, and that stark contrast between the fictional world of Bond and the often harsh reality of espionage, there are genuinely unexpected and, I think, useful lessons to be found about writing, about perseverance, about the nature of work, branding, and even the complexities of the human experience itself.
So as we wrap up, here's maybe a final provocative thought for you to consider. Why does James Bond continue to resonate so strongly with audiences all around the world, even as the character changes, the actors change, and the world around him changes so dramatically?
Is his enduring appeal purely about escapism, just a thrilling fantasy of action, gadgets, and glamour? Or does it perhaps tap into something deeper? A fascination with that specific, maybe contradictory blend of discipline, style, loyalty, competence, and moral complexity that feels both aspirationally capable and perhaps, especially in recent years, realistically flawed. Much like the complex, flawed man who originally brought him to life all those years ago in Jamaica. Something to think about.
Thanks for listening to All in All.